Hi guys, back with another video. A beautiful fall day. My computer says it's 20 degrees. I would believe it. Yeah, it seems about 20 degrees. You can probably see all the leaves behind me there, falling. We have two maple trees just right there. One's pretty full grown and mature, and the other's only, I don't know, 10 years old. But they're adding up, and the kids love raking them. So, I mean, I would take them and put them in the compost, but they would kill me if I did that. So today I am going to talk about a book I started a long time ago. I started reading this book, I don't know, probably a year ago, and then just finished it up the other day. Uh, it's in the thumbnail, and I'll just show it to you here. It's a short book. It's only like, I don't know, 140 pages or whatever. Um, it was excellent. So one of the things, anybody who knows who Cervantes is knows who knows Don Quixote, and it seemed, from what I've been able to figure out, there's only been two of his books translated into English. In addition to that, there's a book of what we call short stories, I guess, which he calls exemplary tales. I have a copy of that, and I've only read the first short story from it. It's long, but only the first one. And he has another book called La Galatea, but it's not been published. It's not been translated into English, as far as I can tell. And it's kind of like a love kind of thing. Like think of Ovid's Ars Ars Amoris or whatever, the Art of Love or something. So I'm not 100% sure about that. But I wanted to read about Cervantes because, well, I didn't know anything about him. And of course, anyone who watches my videos knows that I love Don Quixote. Um, and it's been one of those growing loves. It's just like this love affair between me and Don Quixote has been started off tepid and then got super hot. Okay. I'm super in love with Don Quixote. So so I've looked around and looked around for biographies of Cervantes, and I came across this one, I think by accident. Yeah, my favorite books, my favorite used bookstore in Ottawa had a copy, and this was $20 for this. It's hardcover, but it's short. And I was like, well, I got to read it because where else are you going to find a biography of Cervantes as an English speaker? You know, probably if you go to Spain, they're probably all over the place. I did a bit of research for what's available out there. And it's funny. The Wikipedia page doesn't even quote this book, so I think this is probably like a book for the general introduction. It's, as I said, it's only 140 pages or whatever, and it's easy reading, big print, blah blah blah. Um, so it's a great place to start. I looked on the Wikipedia page, and I looked on some library connection sites, and there are lots of biographies of Cervantes, even translated into English, or I should say in English, either translated or original. Um, but to me, it seems to me they're pretty hard to get because just going by my memory, that I just happened across this one after having looked on Amazon or whatever for a biography. But so I was happy to get this one. So what else? Okay, so um, I suppose the first thing you could say about the life of Cervantes is that it's wow, it's everything that happened to him. Like I should say it this way: his life was very much a copy of a lot of the things that happen in his stories, in especially in Don Quixote. Like he and the cool thing is that the biography helps you to see things in Don Quixote that you didn't realize before, you didn't understand the significance of before. So the biography helps you with that, which is great. Um, so the first the thing, okay, so he was basically, lower, I don't know what you call it, lower middle class or something. I know there wasn't really middle class at the time, but he was, not poor, but certainly not wealthy, and he struggled with money his whole life long, even after his tremendous fame as an author, because there was no copyright at the time. And he would have been a millionaire today, like a Stephen King or whatever, because his book Don Quixote was just so popular immediately. But he didn't make a lot of money off it because there's no copyright, and people kept infringing, printing their own copies, and there was even a plagiarism going around, which he had to respond to in part two of Don Quixote, which helps explain some of the structure of Don Quixote. So, so he began basically sort of in the civil service, kind of civil service, but he was working for someone from the aristocracy or nobility, some cardinal, and then he ended up in Italy because a chunk of Italy was controlled by Spain at the time. And then eventually he was involved. He joined the military, and he was involved in the Battle of Lepanto, believe it or not. And soon after Lepanto, he was captured by, I guess it was Muslim pirates. So it's kind of funny. Like, a lot of people don't realize, who have never studied history or whatever. And I was thinking about this the other day. There was a video that keeps being suggested on my YouTube that says something like, uh, Columbus was Islamophobic or something. Well, yeah, definitely. Um, Muslims were extremely dangerous at the time, and the Muslim piracy, Muslim conquest. Islam was composed of several very powerful kingdoms at the time. It's not like it is today, where, say, the strongest Islamic country is probably, well, either Saudi Arabia or Iran. These are no global threat. The U.S. could conquer them anytime it wanted to. But in that day, I mean, you're talking about the Ottoman Empire, which is maybe, could definitely give Spain a run for its money, maybe even stronger than Spain. So in excuse me, around 1600, Islam and Christendom were kind of neck and neck, really. And it was the centuries subsequently that Islam fell by the wayside, and the Christian kingdoms, or whatever you want to call it, just exploded in power. Now, this has a lot to do with the development of the discovery of North America, the discovery of a route around Africa to the Indian markets, Indian spice trade, which cut out the Muslim middleman. But it also had to do with several other things. Number one, I would say the development of technology in the West via the scientific revolution and so on. So the West didn't discover gunpowder, but they certainly were far more interested in developing more and more uses for it. And so we're talking about development of artillery and guns and so on, that the West that Islam and China and India had no sort of interest in, as more conservative cultures, whereas the West was really in a powerful kind of, and this some, gosh, I can't remember his name. A few people have said is that it was the competition amongst European powers, like amongst each other, that really spurred on innovation, especially in the area of warfare, in the area of artillery and so on. So it was a competition. Whereas the Islamic world, it was more conservative. There was less competition. The Turkish Sultan or whatever was basically the guy. You didn't need great. There was no power struggles per se, like there was in the West. And China was way too conservative and monolithic, um, to be interested in development of those technologies. But as we know, gunpowder was discovered in China, but subsequently it didn't make the use of it that come 16th century, 17th century onward, the West began to perfect. Okay, so that we have, like, for instance, uh, uh, what's his name going to Portuguese? da Gama, going to India and basically conquering a chunk of India with just a couple of his galleys that were equipped with very powerful and very technologically sophisticated cannon. So there you go. Uh, but anyway, there's a bit of a sidetrack, but I think the context of Islam is extremely important if you're going to understand anything from the 16th and 17th centuries. Um, and if you don't understand the power of the Islamic countries at the time, the threat, like the Mediterranean was no Mare Nostrum. It was a very dangerous place, kind of like the coasts of Somalia now, piracy. Okay. And so going back full circle, Cervantes was captured. Um, it was if I'm remembering correctly, it was sometime after the Battle of Lepanto. And the Battle of Lepanto, for those who don't know, was an extremely important moment in the shift. In the shift between the equality of power between Christendom and Islam. So Lepanto was basically organized by the Pope of the time. I can't remember. I think Pius V, if I'm remembering correctly. He organized this kind of crusade type thing, and we're talking about involving the most powerful Spanish king ever, Philip II. Uh, I believe Genoa and Venice, the very very powerful Italian merchant powers. And did I miss anyone? Well, I guess the Spanish forces in Italy. Just trying to. I'm sure there were other Western forces involved, and it was the shift of when the Mediterranean began to shift in the West's favor. So the Muslim fleet was destroyed, and Muslim dominance in the Mediterranean was thenceforward on a downward trend. Of course, it doesn't end there, as we see. Like Cervantes is captured, so I can't remember exactly. He was held for a while, like a couple of years, I believe, and that's an interesting fact. And eventually, he was ransomed. But that's an interesting fact because we see little side stories in Don Quixote uh, about stuff like that, and the whole idea of being captured and ransomed. This a very common feature in literature over the late Middle Ages and so on. Um, if I'm not mistaken, it even appears in Voltaire's Candide as one of the tragedies that befalls the main characters. Is one of them is captured and whatever, taken into slavery or whatever, in North Africa, which is exactly what happened to Cervantes. And now remember, there's 150 years separating Voltaire and Cervantes. Okay, so the threat of Islam in the Mediterranean didn't die, but that's, as I said, that's when the shift started. All right, so once he's ransomed, he's back in Spain, and he's writing, and he, I mean, the main genre of the time was the play. You know, just as in let's remember, this is exactly when Shakespeare's writing. So we're talking about around the year 1600. It's exactly when Shakespeare's writing. Shakespeare's writing his most famous plays at around 1600, like Hamlet and Julius Caesar and Othello, all these magnificent creations. Spain has its same thing, but the Shakespeare Spain is not Cervantes. It's another guy who basically dominated Spanish literature and put basically Cervantes in a very, 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 very distant second place. Um, that is until he wrote Don Quixote. So, and let's remember, Don Quixote is called the first novel. The first novel. Okay, you got to wrap your mind around that. And this isn't first of all, I'm not able to give a history of the novel. I can throw out some guesses and so on about certain things and certain moments, but it's widely said that Cervantes' Don Quixote is the first novel, and I kind of understand what they're talking about there. Um, Up to this point, almost everything is poetry. When you think of the great works, you think of things like the Divine Comedy, um, and even say Spenser's Fairy Queen. Um, Huge works, many chansons de geste, the accounts of people like King Arthur and all these things is in verse. It's all verse. The switch to prose is a gradual one, and it's not, again, not definite. I'm still reading Johnson's Lives of the Poets, and I'm on the chapter on Dryden, and Dryden, he wrote mostly plays, and Dryden's 1650ish. I'm just sort of a generation or two after Shakespeare, and he's still writing his plays in verse, um, and so the introduction of prose is a huge thing. But also think of Don Quixote, where this is an almost 1,000-page book, say, so it's a huge book, in prose, following a development of one or two characters, one main character, and there's a lot of personal or psychological development and so on. I think these are key elements in what a novel is. So even though the betters, uh, Cervantes' betters, looked askew at his works, um, Don Quixote became extremely popular. And I'm not going to go into all the nitty gritties of that, but that this is a real revolution. And immediately, Cervantes becomes a genius. He goes from this person that nobody would ever stage his plays, nobody gave any consideration to him, to a super genius where his former competitor becomes envious of him, and that's the complete shift. So it's a real moment. It's a real moment in the history of literature. Um, but as I said, uh, according anyway to this biographer, he always sort of had I don't know if I'd call it a chip on his shoulder, but he felt he's never given his proper due. He was a hero at Lepanto, and it was regarded as such. And he lost the use of one of his arms actually because of an injury. One of his arms was lame for the rest of his life. He was regarded as a hero initially. A hero. It's kind of like he's definitely get the credit of like somebody coming back from World War II. That was kind of like the feeling at the time, and somebody who got the Victoria Cross or something like that. So Cervantes was a Victoria Cross recipient, and now this massive, mega successful author of this new thing called the novel. I don't know if it was called a novel, but you know what I mean. And yet he was never financially successful, and he always seemed to have a feeling of resentment because of that. Um, but anyway, uh, so there you go. That's kind of my overview of the book. I'm going to keep looking into biographies of Cervantes, see if I can find uh, another more extensive one, because frankly, if I'm not sure what the situation is. Like, is there is does this represent all that can be ascertained about him, and that longer books would just be sort of filling it with quotes from Don Quixote or whatever? Um, or is there like, are there are there letters that survive of his written to him or written by him? I don't know. I don't know what the historical sources are. So I'm going to keep my eyes open anyway, and I'm definitely going to read this book again because, as I said, I read it over about a year. Read the first half like a year ago or somewhere thereabouts, and the second half just the last couple days. And I'd like a refresher on the first part. So definitely going to read it again, and I'm going to read Don Quixote with a new perspective. It's going to help me with that. And as I said, like one of the weird things about Don Quixote is that there's two parts, and what you sort of find out from the biography is that originally it was just one, is extremely popular. So the one part of Don Quixote's journey, his adventures, he comes back home, and then evidently one of his competitors' friends um, wrote a wrote a second part to it, obviously unauthorized. It was really a way to take a shot at Cervantes. So his enemy basically wrote a continuation of Don Quixote. So Don Quixote had to write a second book, basically. And that's why, as the author says, that's why Don Quixote, sorry, spoiler alert here, that's why Don Quixote, the whole story ends with Don Quixote's death, because Cervantes says that he doesn't want any more, he doesn't want any more fake Don Quixote stories. So he kills Don Quixote at the end of the second book, and as a way to say that's it. But we know like Graham Greene wrote a what was it called? Anyway, he wrote a story about Don Quixote's descendant and Sancho Panza's descendant. Anyway, so it's not the end of Don Quixote in that sense, but there's a lot of weird references in the shift between the first volume and the second volume, or first book and second book, where it's talking about authors and people telling fake stories about Don Quixote and so on, and you're like, what is this? So basically it's Cervantes telling us in Don Quixote that somebody wrote fake stories of Don Quixote. And what's so interesting is that Cervantes incorporates this into the whole story itself, that there's fake Don Quixotes out there. It's so interesting. Anyway, so again, I say Don Quixote is my second favorite book next to War and Peace. And I'm going to leave it at that for now. And we'll see where we go from here. So anyway, thanks guys so much for listening, and consider supporting me on Patreon or whatever, or PayPal or money transfer or whatever, or buying my book. My work is coming along well, despite my psychological problems. My work is coming along well. I wrote a short story called, what was it called? A Quick Death, or Quick Deaths, I think. It's on my Patreon there. You can go over to it. It's not behind the paywall or anything. So that was a fun thing to write. And I'm writing a second short story now, which I don't know, I'm about halfway through. I don't know, halfway or a third of the way through or something. So short stories are not something I really gave much thought to out after childhood, because I've heard that the short story is dead. But why does the short story have to be dead? I'm so influenced by Chekhov. I'm so inspired by Chekhov's short stories that these can be important media, okay, or genres. So anyway, yeah, just if you could keep me in mind, if you got an extra $5 or something, that would be primo. I'm bankrupt and having some difficulties. So thank you so much, guys. I love making these videos. I love talking about books. So have a great day. It is February. Okay. It is October 14th. February 14th is Valentine's Day. Anyway, so have a great day, guys. And I think I'll enjoy the rest of this beautiful day if you do too. Thanks. Bye now.